Every person who has ever failed at being consistent believes the same thing about why they failed. They believe they lacked discipline. They believe they were not trying hard enough, not waking up early enough, not wanting it badly enough. They believe the problem lives inside their character, that they are, at some fundamental level, the kind of person who quits. That belief is wrong. Not partially wrong, not wrong in a nuanced, complicated way, structurally wrong, wrong in the way that makes everything harder the more seriously you take it. Here is the part nobody talks about. The harder you try to fix yourself using discipline, the more evidence you collect that the fixing is not working. That confirms the original belief, which makes you try harder, which exhausts you faster. You have been running that loop. Maybe for years. Maybe you can point to the exact moment it started, the gym membership, the savings goal, the creative project you told yourself would be different this time. And it was different for a while. Then it wasn't. And the story you told yourself afterward was the familiar one. Not enough willpower, not enough drive. But what if the story is the problem, and not the person telling it? What you are about to hear will not ask you to try harder. It will not ask you to wake up earlier or build a better morning routine or find your why. It will ask you to consider one possibility. Consistency was never a willpower problem to begin with. It has always been a design problem. Once you see the difference between those two things, you will not be able to unsee it. Chapter 1. Discipline is the wrong tool entirely. Every era of human history has produced the same figure. Across centuries and continents, in every language and culture, there appears a person who should not have succeeded. By every visible measure, energy, talent, natural drive, they looked like the least likely candidate. And yet they built something real and lasting. Meanwhile, the disciplined ones, the motivated ones, the people with rigid morning routines and color-coded calendars, quietly burned out. This is not a coincidence, it is a pattern. And the pattern points to something about consistency that most people have been taught exactly backward. You are about to hear what that is. Not because it will inspire you for an afternoon, but because once you see the actual mechanics of how lasting behavior works, the old model will stop making sense entirely. That is the kind of understanding that sticks. Think about the last time you broke a streak. Maybe it was a workout plan. Maybe it was saving a fixed amount every month, or writing every morning, or eating differently, or getting up an hour earlier than you usually do. You started clean. The first few days felt almost easy, even good. There was something satisfying about checking the box, about being the person who does the thing they said they were going to do. And then one day you did not. Maybe life interrupted. Maybe you were tired in a way that felt deeper than physical. Maybe there was no dramatic reason at all. You just did not do it. Then the next day it felt harder to restart than it would have been to simply never stop. A week passed, and somewhere in that week, you quietly filed the whole effort under things I tried and moved on. You have been told that what failed there was you. That is the story. The story says you lacked discipline, you lacked willpower, you were not consistent enough, committed enough, hungry enough. The story says the problem was a character flaw, something soft inside you that the right person would not have. And so you try again with more force, stricter rules, a harsher internal voice. You find a new program with more structure, more accountability, more pressure. You tell yourself this time will be different because this time you mean it more. And then it happens again. Here is the question that nobody stops to ask. It is the one that will matter most to you before this chapter is over. What if the system itself is broken? Not you, the system. What if consistency built on willpower is like a house built on sand? Not because the builder was careless, but because sand was always the wrong foundation. What if the entire model of discipline you have been handed, the one that treats your desires as enemies to be conquered and your comfort as a weakness to be punished, is not just ineffective but is actually designed by its own nature to fail? This is the question this chapter is built around, and the answer is going to require you to look at something you have probably called laziness in yourself with very different eyes. But first, a story. Marcus ran a small landscaping company out of a mid-sized city in the Midwest. He had started it at 24 with a borrowed truck and one client, a neighbor who felt sorry for him. By 31, he had 18 employees and contracts with 3 commercial properties. People in his circle often said Marcus was the most consistent person they knew. He never missed a client call. His crews were always on time. His invoices went out the same day every week without fail. Friends who struggled with their own businesses would ask him about his discipline. His answer always confused them. He would say, "I'm not disciplined. I just genuinely can't stand the feeling of a thing left undone." He was not forcing himself to send the invoices. The discomfort of not sending them was greater than the effort of sending them. His consistency was not a product of willpower. It was the path of least resistance, built from who he actually was. When his business eventually hit a difficult stretch and his revenue dropped for 4 months straight, Marcus did not collapse. He adjusted. His consistency was not fragile. It was not held together by morning motivation or personal pressure. It was structural. It was him. Notice what that story does not say. It does not say Marcus was exceptional. It does not say he had some rare gift for discipline that you do not have. It says he had aligned the way he operated with the things that actually moved him. The friction was pointed in a different direction than most people point it. For most people, friction exists between them and the habit they want to build. For Marcus, the friction existed between him and the absence of the habit. That inversion is everything. There is an idea here worth letting land for a second. Think about the habits you have kept without effort, not the ones you are proud of because they were hard, but the ones that have simply persisted year after year because stopping them never occurred to you. Maybe it is checking your phone first thing in the morning. Maybe it is a route you drive without thinking. Maybe it is the way you always make coffee before anything else, or the show you put on at night, or the way you unwind after a hard day. You did not build those habits through discipline. They grew because they were frictionless, because they fit the grooves of who you already are. Now think about the habits you have tried to force. The gap between those two categories, the ones that stuck without effort and the ones that collapsed despite effort, that gap is not a moral gap. It is not evidence that you are lazy or undisciplined or broken. It is a design gap. The habits that stuck were aligned with your existing identity. The habits that collapsed were placed on top of it, like a building code that does not match the actual terrain. Willpower is real, but it is a finite resource, and the research on this is not ambiguous. Every act of conscious self-regulation draws from the same pool. The more decisions you force through willpower in a given day, the less you have available for the next forced decision. This is why the diet breaks at 10 at night and not at 10 in the morning. This is why the savings plan collapses when stress hits and not when life is smooth. Any system that depends on willpower to function will eventually meet the moment when the well is dry. And on that day, the system breaks. That is not weakness, that is physics. The discipline as willpower model does not account for this. It just tells you to try harder next time. But trying harder within a broken model does not fix the model. It accelerates the breaking. You end up more depleted, with more evidence that you cannot be trusted, and with a slightly louder internal critic who will make the next attempt even harder than the last one. Down the line in this book, you will run into an idea about motivation that runs straight against the usual belief. When that idea snaps into focus, it changes how you act on days when you feel absolutely nothing. But right now, stay here. There is one more piece to this first layer, and it is the piece that will reframe everything that comes after. The word laziness. You have probably used it to describe yourself at some point. Maybe you use it regularly. It sits in the mind as an accusation, evidence that something in you defaults to rest when it should be pushing forward. But what if laziness is not a personality defect? What if it is a signal? What if the consistent pull toward avoiding a particular effort is your own system telling you that the effort is misaligned, that the friction is pointing in the wrong direction? This does not mean every uncomfortable thing should be avoided. It means the nature of the discomfort matters. There is a difference between the discomfort of growth, which passes and leaves something behind, and the discomfort of misalignment, which does not pass because the underlying cause does not change. Laziness in this reading is your mind's most efficient way of telling you the second kind of discomfort is happening. It is not an enemy. It is a diagnostic tool. The laziest version of you has been trying to tell you something, not that you should stop, but that the direction is wrong. Consistency was never going to come from forcing yourself into a shape you were not built for. It was always going to come from finding the version of the action that fits the shape you already are, making that version so frictionless that not doing it becomes the harder choice. Discipline is not the tool. It was never the tool. The question is, what replaces it? Chapter 2. Laziness is just misaligned energy reporting. What replaces it is not discipline. That is the answer almost everyone gives you, and almost everyone is wrong. You have heard it in podcasts, read it in caption-sized advice, seen it worn on t-shirts at gyms full of people who will quit by February. Discipline. The word lands like a verdict. As though your whole problem, every version of your stalling, your starting over, your falling short, is simply that you lack the grit to force yourself through the wall. That belief is not just unhelpful. It is structurally backwards. It explains nothing about why you are inconsistent, and it guarantees you will stay that way. The reason no one corrects it is because the correction requires admitting something uncomfortable. Not about you, about the system you were handed. By the end of this chapter, you will hear laziness differently, not as a confession, but as a signal your whole life has been trying to send you. Here is the question that will anchor everything that follows. Why does the same person who cannot drag themselves out of bed for a job they dread somehow stay awake until 2 in the morning working on something no one is paying them for? Hold that question. We will come back to it. First, you need to understand something about energy. Not in a vague, glowing aura sense. In the plainest mechanical sense. Energy in a living human being is not created equally across all activities. You do not burn effort the way an engine burns fuel, steady and replaceable. You burn it in patterns. And those patterns are shaped by something underneath behavior that most advice completely ignores. That something is identity. Your identity is not a belief you chose. It is a gravity field that formed around your accumulated experiences, your repeated choices, your deepest sense of who you are in the world. And gravity does not ask permission. It pulls everything toward its center without effort, without intention, and without apology. The things that align with your identity feel light. You move toward them easily, almost accidentally, the way water finds a drain. The things that contradict your identity feel heavy, not because they are hard in an objective sense, because your own internal architecture is working against you every step of the way. This is identity gravity. And it is the reason discipline alone has never saved anyone who was pulling in the wrong direction. Remember the life you were living before these last 3 years unfolded, before hindsight edits it. Think about the things you tried to be consistent about, the routines you built, the habits you tracked, the goals you wrote down. How many of those survived? Now think about something from that same period that you did consistently, without tracking it, without anyone holding you accountable, without a single day of forcing yourself. Maybe it was how you spent Sunday mornings. Maybe it was a conversation you always found yourself having. Maybe it was a type of problem you kept gravitating toward without knowing why. You did not discipline yourself into those things. They happened because they were aligned with who you were. Identity gravity pulled you there. This is where the diagnosis starts. Meet Marcus. Marcus was 26 years old and had a title on paper, Junior Operations Coordinator at a mid-sized logistics company. That meant he spent 8 hours a day inside a spreadsheet tracking shipment delays. He was not bad at it. He was slow. He was distracted. He missed updates. His manager called him disorganized, and after 2 written warnings in 1 year, Marcus called himself lazy and believed it. He genuinely believed that something was broken inside him that worked fine in everyone else. He tried waking up earlier. He tried productivity timers. He tried a wall calendar with color-coded blocks. Every system collapsed within 2 weeks. The shame became its own weight. The harder he tried to build discipline, the more exhausted he felt. And the more exhausted he felt, the more the word lazy settled into his chest like something permanent. Then his company went through a reorganization. Budget cuts. His role was eliminated, but a manager he barely knew offered him a temporary transfer to the customer complaint resolution team. It paid less. The work looked worse on paper. Marcus said yes because he had no other choice. Within 3 weeks, something happened that Marcus could not explain and his manager could not ignore. He started arriving before anyone else. He stayed late not because anyone asked him to, but because he was in the middle of something. He built a tracking system on his own without being asked that reduced average complaint resolution time by 11 days. He did not use a timer. He did not use a wall calendar. He forgot to check his phone. His manager told him he was one of the most focused people on the team. Marcus had not changed. The work had changed. And the work had changed in one specific direction. It required him to understand people, to listen for what someone was not saying, to find the real problem beneath the stated complaint. That skill had no name in his old job. In this job, it was the whole job. Marcus, who had spent a year believing he was broken, discovered that he had been carrying enormous capacity the entire time, aimed at a wall. Here is the thing about Marcus that matters most. His laziness was not laziness. It was a diagnostic signal that had been misfiled as a character flaw. Every time he stalled on a shipment log, every time he missed an update, that friction was data. It was his identity gravity reporting back that the direction was wrong. The problem was never effort. The problem was alignment. And this is the revelation that changes how you read your own life. Laziness is not the absence of energy. Laziness is energy reporting misalignment. When you feel that specific drag, that particular thickness in the air between you and a task, your system is not failing. It is functioning. It is producing a signal, accurate and consistent, that says, this is not where your energy is meant to flow. The tragedy is not that the signal exists. The tragedy is that most people spend years punishing themselves for receiving it. The discipline model treats you as a broken machine. It says you are producing the wrong output and the solution is more force. Tighten the schedule, add accountability, white-knuckle the mornings, and maybe, for a while, force works. You can override a signal with enough pressure, but pressure has a cost. When the pressure lifts, when life intervenes, when the novelty wears off, when one bad week breaks the streak, you collapse back to the baseline. Not because you failed. Because you were never aligned in the first place. You were just forcing. The alternative is not easier in the short term. It requires something most advice skips entirely: honest diagnosis. Not of your habits, of your identity. You have to ask yourself what kind of person you already are, beneath the person you have been told to become. What problems do you find yourself solving without anyone asking you to? What conversations have you always been drawn into, even when they were none of your business? What type of work makes you lose track of time, not because it is easy, but because it is yours? These are not personality quiz questions. They are identity gravity readings. They tell you where your energy pools naturally. And where energy pools naturally is where consistency stops being an act of will and starts being a function of design. A little later, we will get to a point about motivation that runs straight against the usual belief. Once that lands, it shifts how you act every single morning. For now, understand this. The laziest person in every room is not the person with the least drive. They are the person whose drive has been aimed at the wrong target for the longest time. They are pulling maximum effort through maximum resistance, and the rest of the world watches them stall and calls it weakness. It is not weakness. It is misdirection. Remember the question from the beginning of this chapter. Why does the person who cannot get out of bed for work they dread stay awake until 2 in the morning on something no one is paying them for? You already know the answer. It is not about the hour. It is not about the money. It is about the pull. That late-night work has identity gravity. It aligns with something true about who they are. The friction disappears because the direction is right. That pull is not a hobby. It is a report. And the most important skill you can develop right now is not discipline. It is learning to read what that report actually says. What would change about your daily life if you stopped treating your resistance as a flaw and started treating it as a compass? Chapter 3. Identity does the work willpower cannot. Trying harder is often the worst advice you can give someone who keeps failing. That sounds like permission to quit. You might already be preparing the argument against it, but stay with this. The people who finally build lasting consistency are almost never the ones who decided to want it more. They are the ones who stopped needing willpower at all. Something inside them shifted so completely that doing the right thing became less painful than not doing it. That shift has a name. By the time this chapter is over, you will understand exactly why every system you have tried before was building the wrong thing entirely. This chapter keeps circling one question all the way through this section. It is one most people never think to ask. Why does the same person who cannot get out of bed early for work somehow wake up before sunrise on the morning of a flight, without an alarm, with no friction at all? Hold that question. You will need it later. Look back at the person you were before these last 3 years unfolded, before hindsight edits it. Not where you wanted to be, where you actually were, the habits you had, the things you told yourself you were going to fix. How many of those fixes required you to fight yourself every single day just to maintain them? And how many of the things you actually kept doing required no fight at all? That gap, the one between the things that stuck and the things that didn't, was not a willpower gap. It was an identity gap. Here is what that means. Every human being carries a self-concept, a deep and mostly unconscious picture of who they are, not who they want to be, who they believe they currently are, and that self-concept functions less like a mirror and more like a gravitational field. It does not just reflect your behavior, it pulls your behavior toward it constantly with a quiet force that never gets tired and never takes a day off. Call this identity gravity. It is the reason diets collapse on day 11. It is the reason the person who has never thought of themselves as a reader cannot make a reading habit stick, no matter how many book lists they save. And it is the reason that when you finally do change, when you really change, it happens fast and it holds. Because gravity suddenly starts pulling in a new direction. Most people trying to build consistency are fighting gravity. They are applying force against the field. That takes enormous energy. And the moment the energy runs out, which it always does, the field wins. Willpower is a finite resource being spent against an infinite one. That is not a contest. That is a slow defeat. The discipline as willpower model treats you like a broken machine. It says you have the right instructions, you have the right goals, and if you just apply enough pressure to the controls, the outputs will change. But the outputs do not change, not permanently, because the machine metaphor is wrong. You are not a machine with a broken part. You are a system organized around a story, and the story is running everything. Change the story, and the behavior follows without a fight. Nadia was 31 years old and had tried to start saving money 4 times in 6 years. She knew the exact steps. She had a spreadsheet. She had opened a high-yield savings account and named it after the vacation she wanted to take. She had read the books, listened to the podcasts, and written down her goals in a notebook she kept near her bed. Every attempt lasted between 3 weeks and 2 months. Then something would come up, or nothing would come up, and the money would quietly migrate back into spending. She blamed herself every time. She told people she was bad with money. One afternoon, she was having coffee with her older sister 𝗜𝗓𝗧𝗔𝗡, who had been financially stable for years without seeming to think about it much. Nadia asked her directly, "What is your secret?" 𝗜𝗓𝗧𝗘 thought about it for a moment and said something that sounded almost useless at first. She said, "I'm just not the kind of person who touches that account." Nadia went home and sat with that sentence for a long time. Not "I am disciplined," not "I have a system," a statement about who she was. Nadia stopped trying to save money. Instead, she started practicing one small thing. When she transferred money to savings and felt the urge to pull it back, she said quietly to herself, "That is not who I am anymore." Not because she believed it fully, because she wanted to make it true. Within 8 months, the habit had calcified. The account grew without drama. The fight stopped. Not because saving got easier, because she became someone for whom touching that account felt wrong. One sentence changed her gravitational field. Notice what did not happen in Nadia's story. She did not get more motivated. She did not find a better app. She did not read another book about personal finance. She changed the label she placed on herself, and then she let the gravity do the rest. That is not magic. That is engineering. Now here is where this gets specific to you. Every behavior you have failed to build consistently has been failing for a predictable reason. It did not match who you believed you were when you attempted it. It sat outside your gravitational field. Maintaining it required constant energy input. And since life is full of things that drain energy, the behavior was always one bad week away from disappearing. What would it mean if you stopped trying to build habits and started trying to build an identity instead? Here is the practical distinction, and it matters enormously. Building a habit says, I need to do this thing regularly. Building an identity says, I am the kind of person who does this kind of thing. One requires your attention every day. The other operates below your attention in the gravitational layer, pulling your choices without asking for your effort. This is why the laziest path forward is identity work, not because it requires no effort, because the effort is front-loaded and then the system runs without you. You do the identity work once carefully and then you stop fighting. The path of least resistance shifts to point in the direction you wanted to go. Think back to the flight example. The reason you wake up before dawn without needing an alarm is that in that context, you have no identity conflict. You are a person taking a trip. Waking up is part of what that person does. There is no internal argument, no negotiation, no willpower required. The behavior is completely congruent with the story running underneath it. Now imagine having that same sense of congruence around saving, or exercise, or building something, or showing up to your work with actual focus. Not because you decided to be more disciplined, because the identity underneath those behaviors shifted. Now not doing them creates friction, while doing them creates flow. That is the inversion. That is what changes everything. When a behavior matches who you believe you are, skipping it becomes the uncomfortable option. You do not need discipline to make the bed if you are the kind of person who makes the bed. You need discipline to leave it unmade. The discomfort has flipped. And flipped discomfort is one of the most powerful forces in human behavior. Further on, we will get to a point about motivation that runs straight against the usual belief. When that becomes clear, it shifts how you decide what to try next. But for now, stay here in this chapter. There is one more piece to this, and it is the piece most identity-based frameworks leave out. The question is never just, what identity should I adopt? It is, why does your current identity feel so true? Your self-concept did not appear from nowhere. It was built slowly from evidence. Every time you started something and stopped, you handed your self-concept a small piece of evidence that said, I am the kind of person who stops. Every time you told someone you were bad with money or bad at being consistent, you reinforced the gravitational field pulling you back toward those outcomes. You were not describing yourself. You were programming yourself, and the program ran faithfully. This means two things. First, you are not broken. You are working exactly as designed. Second, you can design differently by being meticulous about the evidence you hand your self-concept from today forward. Small actions, done consistently, cast votes for a new identity. This is not a metaphor. This is how the self-concept updates. It takes new information in slowly and adjusts the gravitational field. One vote will not move the field, but 100 small votes, 100 tiny moments where you acted like the person you are becoming, will begin to shift the pull. This is also where your previous laziness becomes a tool rather than a flaw. If you have avoided something persistently for years, despite trying many times, that persistent avoidance is data. It is not proof that you lack willpower. It is proof of identity misalignment. The behavior sits outside your gravitational field. The path forward is not more effort in the same direction. It is identity work first. Establish the new self-concept. Vote for it even in very small ways. Let the gravity shift. Then move. The most consistent person you know is not out-disciplining you, they are out-aligning you. The behaviors that look effortless from the outside are effortless from the inside too, because those behaviors are falling naturally toward who that person believes they are. You can be that person, not by deciding to be better, by deciding to be different. The real question is not, how do I make myself do this? It is, who is the kind of person who naturally does this, and what would that person believe about themselves? Answer that, and you have found your new gravitational center. What would you have to believe about yourself for the behavior you want most to feel like the obvious, natural, easy thing to do? Chapter 4. The rarest feeling, stopping feels harder. Every hour you are not operating from your actual identity is a cost, not a vague, philosophical cost, a measurable one. The effort you spend right now trying to force yourself through things you believe you should do, through willpower and self-recrimination, is effort that will never compound. It disappears. Today's grinding push produces tomorrow's exhaustion. Exhaustion produces the missed day. The missed day produces the guilt. And the guilt produces the long explanation about why next week will be different. That cycle has a price tag. It costs you not just the time inside the cycle, but every day of momentum that never builds, every version of consistency that stays permanently just out of reach. Here is the part no one talks about. The mechanism keeping you stuck is not laziness. It is not weakness. It is the complete absence of one specific feeling, a feeling most people have never experienced, but one that changes everything the moment it arrives. This chapter is about that feeling, what it is, where it comes from, how to get there. That question at the end of the last chapter was not rhetorical. What would you have to believe about yourself for the behavior you want most to feel like the obvious, natural, easy thing to do? Most people hear that and go straight to answers. They try to manufacture a belief by repeating a phrase in the mirror. They journal. They make a list of affirmations, and then nothing sticks. They skipped something. They skipped understanding what that feeling actually is when the belief has genuinely taken hold. They have no reference point for what they are aiming at, so they aim at nothing and wonder why they keep missing. Here is the reference point. Imagine it is 6 in the morning and you do not want to write. You are a writer, at least you have decided to call yourself one, and you have told yourself you write every morning. But this morning your bed is warm. The idea on your desk feels flat. There is a voice saying, take the day, you earned it, nothing will happen if you skip once. You know that voice. You have heard it 100 times. But then, if you are operating from a particular kind of identity, something else happens. Not discipline, not guilt, not the internal lecture about who you said you would be. Something quieter and more powerful, a sense of wrongness, not dramatic wrongness, just the mild, clear discomfort of being away from something that is yours, like leaving the house and feeling your pocket and knowing your keys are missing. Not panic, just wrongness, and you get up. Not because you forced yourself, because not getting up would feel stranger than getting up. That is the feeling. That is what this chapter is about. Cast your mind back to life 3 years ago and look clearly in whatever area of your life felt most stuck. Think about the things you were trying to make yourself do then. Think about how much energy you poured into the trying. Now ask yourself, how much of that effort was you pushing against something versus moving towards something that pulled you? There is a difference between those two experiences so large they barely deserve the same word. Pushing costs, pulling pays. Now here is the open question. Hold it while this chapter builds toward answering it. If you have ever felt that pull even once in any area of your life, even briefly, what was different in that moment? What had changed? Keep that question close. There is a man named 𝗓𝗓𝗧 who runs a small furniture repair shop in a city that has 3 bigger competitors within a mile. 𝗓𝗓𝗧 is not the cheapest. He is not the fastest. He does not have a flashy website or a marketing strategy. What 𝗓𝗓𝗧 has is a ritual. Every morning before anyone else arrives, before the phone starts, before the first customer drops a chair at the door, 𝗓𝗓𝗧 spends 40 minutes alone with whatever piece he is currently working on. No music, no podcast, just the wood, the light coming through the east window, and whatever repair needs doing. This ritual started by accident 7 years ago. He arrived early once and found the quiet by surprise. It felt so much like himself that he came back the next morning. And the morning after that. His wife asked him once why he did not just sleep in, why he pushed himself out of bed at 5:30 every single day without complaint. 𝗓𝗓𝗧 thought about it for a long time. Then he said, "I do not push myself. I am just uncomfortable when I am not there." He could not fully explain it, but that discomfort, that mild, accurate pullback toward the work, had made him one of the most consistently excellent craftsmen in his neighborhood for 7 straight years. Not because he was more disciplined than other people, because he had accidentally built what most people spend years trying to engineer. Let that sit for a moment before moving forward. 𝗓𝗓𝗧 did not set out to build an identity. He found a feeling and followed it. Most people try to do this in reverse. They decide what they want to do, set a schedule, grit their way through the early weeks, hope that discipline becomes habit, and then feel like failures when it does not hold. The failure is not them. The failure is the model. Discipline as willpower treats you like a machine that needs enough force applied to it. An aligned identity treats you like a person who moves naturally in the direction of what feels like home. Here is the core of this chapter, and it is worth holding still for. True consistency is not grinding through. True consistency is the pull of identity making absence feel like self-betrayal. Not loud, dramatic betrayal. The small, undeniable wrongness of being away from something that is genuinely yours. When you feel that, stopping costs more than continuing. And that is when the behavior you want becomes the path of least resistance. Not because you made it easy, because you made it you. This is what identity gravity means in practice. Gravity does not ask the apple to fall. It does not motivate the apple. It simply makes falling the most natural thing the apple can do. Identity works the same way. When a behavior is deeply enough tied to who you believe you are, you do not need to summon motivation each morning. Absence creates its own gravity. It pulls you back. Most people have felt this at least once. Not about work necessarily. Maybe about a sport you played in your teens, where missing practice felt physically uncomfortable, not because of a coach, but because your legs wanted to run. Maybe about a person, where a single day without contact felt wrong in a way you could not explain. Maybe about a room in your house, or a ritual on Sunday mornings, or the specific way you eat breakfast when no one else is home. Some version of this pull you have felt it, which means you are not broken. You are not missing the capacity. You have just not yet applied that same mechanism to the areas where you most want to be consistent. The question is how, and the answer is less about action than most people expect. You do not build identity gravity by doing the behavior repeatedly until it sticks. Repetition can help, but repetition alone does not create the feeling. What creates the feeling is the story you carry about who is doing the action. When 𝗓𝗓𝗧 sits with his wood in the morning, he is not a man doing his job. He is, in his own quiet understanding of himself, a craftsman, not a person who repairs furniture, a craftsman. That single word carries a whole architecture of meaning, expectation, standard, and belonging. The morning ritual confirms the word. The word makes the ritual feel like coming home. One reinforces the other until the loop is self-sustaining. You have a version of this available to you right now in whatever area you most want consistency. But it requires one honest question first. Not what do I want to do, but who am I being when I do it, not in a performed way. In the specific, quiet, private way that Dario was not explaining to anyone but his wife on a Tuesday night when she asked an ordinary question. Here is where the open question from earlier closes. When you have felt that pull, that sense of something being genuinely yours, the difference in that moment was almost always the same. You were not thinking about the outcome. You were not motivated by the result. You were simply being someone, fully and without apology, and the action confirmed it. The pull came from the identity, not from the reward, which means the path to that feeling is not about finding better rewards. It is about clarifying who you are when you are doing the thing you want to do most. Soon, we will get to a point about motivation that runs straight against the usual belief. After that clicks, it shifts every morning you have left. But right now, the principle here is enough to act on. The rarest feeling is not motivation. It is not discipline. It is not even passion. The rarest feeling is the quiet wrongness of stopping, the sense that absence costs more than presence. That is the sign you have arrived somewhere real, somewhere the behavior has become genuinely yours, and the hardest thing you could do now is walk away. What would it mean for your life if stopping felt harder than continuing? Chapter 5. How to engineer the aligned work condition. Doing less is sometimes the most productive decision you will ever make. That sounds like an excuse. The kind of thing someone says right before they give up. It is not. It is a precise observation about what happens when a person stops pouring effort into work that fights them at every step and starts directing that same effort toward work that pulls them forward on its own. The difference in output is not small. It is the difference between a car stuck in sand, wheels spinning, burning fuel, going nowhere, and that same car on an open road. The engine is identical. The condition is everything. Here is what most people never stop to ask. Not what am I working on, but under what condition am I working? If you have ever sat down to do something and felt 3 hours pass like 20 minutes, you already know exactly what this chapter is about. If you have never felt that, then this chapter is even more important for you than it is for anyone else. Let that question hang for a moment. What would it mean for your life if stopping felt harder than continuing? The person who engineered that condition, who arranged the work, the context, and the identity around it in exactly the right way, that person does not need willpower. They need a reason to stop. The old model will not tell you that. The old model says get up early, get disciplined, push harder, suffer more. It treats you like a machine with a faulty part, something to be corrected through sheer force. But you are not broken, you are misaligned. And misalignment has a very specific solution. It is called engineering. There is a question most people never ask seriously enough to get a useful answer. They ask it in a vague background way while they scroll through job listings or browse articles about finding their passion. They ask, what am I good at? Or they ask, what do I love? These are not bad questions. They are just incomplete. The question that actually matters, the one that leads to the condition where stopping is harder than continuing, is this: what kind of work makes friction disappear? Hold that question open. Do not answer it yet. Before you can answer it honestly, you need a way to measure friction that does not lie to you. Your feelings lie. Your enthusiasm in the first week of anything lies. What does not lie is pattern. And to see the pattern, you need a diagnostic framework. 3 steps in order without skipping any of them. Each one reveals something the previous step cannot. The first step is called a friction audit. It begins not with ambition but with memory. Think back over the last 90 days of work, any work, paid or unpaid, creative or mechanical, social or solitary. You are looking for 2 lists. The first list is work that left you tired in a good way. The kind of tired that comes after a long swim rather than a long argument. The second list is work that left you depleted, hollow, like someone drained something out of you through a slow leak. Do not think about whether the work was important or impressive or what it paid. That is irrelevant right now. Friction is the only metric. Here is what makes this hard. Some of the work on your depleted list is work you are very skilled at. That surprises people. They assume that if you are talented at something, you must enjoy it. But skill and alignment are 2 completely different categories. You can be excellent at something that slowly exhausts your identity every time you do it. And you can be a raw beginner at something that already feels like home. The friction audit is designed specifically to separate skill from alignment. You need to know the difference before you take one more step. Most people skip this step, not because it is difficult, but because it is uncomfortable. Sitting with evidence that you have spent years building skill in the wrong direction is not a fun afternoon. But skipping it does not make the evidence disappear. It just keeps you working in the dark. There is a woman named 𝗓𝗢𝗧𝗘 who spent 9 years as a project manager at a mid-sized logistics firm. She was, by every measurable standard, exceptional at it. Promotions on schedule, performance reviews that read like endorsements, a salary that passed 6 figures before she was 32. On paper, 𝗓𝗢𝗧𝗘 had solved the problem most people in her age group were still panicking over. She had arrived. But every Sunday night, something in 𝗓𝗓𝗧𝗘's chest tightened. Not anxiety exactly, something quieter and more persistent. She described it later as a feeling that she was watching her own life from slightly outside her body, doing all the right things in someone else's story. She started keeping a simple log. Not a journal. She had tried journaling and abandoned it 3 times. Just a log. After every task, she wrote one word, drained or charged. She did this for 60 days without changing anything else. At the end of 60 days, she looked at the pattern. Project coordination, drained. Budget forecasting, drained. The 40-minute conversations she had every Tuesday with new hires about their first few weeks, charged, every single time. The mentoring her company considered a peripheral duty, a nice thing she did on the side. That was the work that left her feeling like more of herself, not less. She did not quit the next day. She did not blow up her life. She just had information she had not had before. That is what the friction audit gives you. Information. Real information, drawn from real behavior, not from wishful thinking or personality quizzes. The second step is called flow mapping. It builds directly on what the audit reveals. Once you have identified your charged work, the categories that create flow rather than friction, you need to document the specific conditions under which that work happens most naturally. This is where most people get vague, and vague is the enemy of engineering. Flow is not random. It feels random because you have not been paying attention to the conditions that summon it. But flow is actually predictable given the right inputs. Think about your charge work list. Ask yourself, what time of day does this work feel easiest? What environment surrounds me when I do it well? Am I alone or with others? Am I creating from scratch or refining something that already exists? Is the feedback immediate or delayed? These are not personality quiz questions. They are engineering specifications. Return to the person you were before these last 3 years unfolded, before hindsight edits it. Think about the work you were doing, the environment you were in, the hours you kept. Now think about the moments inside that period, not the whole period, just the moments when you felt most alive in the work. What was different about those moments? Not your mood, not your motivation, the condition, the setup, what surrounded you, because those moments are data, and data does not lie. Later on, we will get to a point about motivation that runs straight against the usual belief. Once you grasp that turn, it shifts how you act every single morning. For now, document what the flow mapping reveals. Write it down in plain language, not aspirational language. Not "I want to work on meaningful projects in a collaborative environment." That is a resume phrase. Write something like, "I do my clearest thinking before 10 in the morning alone when the problem has at least one creative constraint and I can see the result the same day I start." That level of specificity is what makes engineering possible. Without it, you are just hoping. This is the step people actually enjoy. It gives them a picture of themselves that feels true rather than assigned. But the third step is where almost everyone stops, and it is the step that changes everything. The third step is the declaration. It is the hardest of the three, not because it requires skill or time or research. It requires something more uncomfortable than any of those things. It requires you to state out loud, in plain language with no hedging, who you are in relation to the work you just mapped. Not who you hope to be, not who you plan to become, who you are. The declaration sounds like this: "I am someone who builds things that help other people see their problems clearly," or "I am someone who finds patterns in numbers and turns them into decisions," or "I am someone who teaches through conversation, not through documents." These are identity statements, not job titles. Job titles are assigned by other people. Identity statements are claimed by you. Most people hedge the declaration. They say things like, "I think I might be good at," or "I'm working toward becoming someone who." The hedge feels humble. It is not humble. It is a way of staying safe from the discomfort of commitment. Because once you declare an identity, everything that contradicts it becomes visible. Every piece of misaligned work on your calendar stands out like a wrong note, and that visibility creates pressure to act. This is where alignment becomes engineering. Discovery is passive. You stumble into it through exposure and pattern. Engineering is active. You use what you found in the audit, you document what you mapped in the flow exercise, and then you make a claim about who you are that your future decisions have to answer to. Priya made her declaration 18 months after those 60 days of logging. She did not announce it publicly. She wrote it in a notebook and kept it on her desk. "I am someone who helps people find the right path when they are new." That sentence shaped every decision she made after it. She joined a mentorship nonprofit as a weekend volunteer. She started writing short guides for her firm's onboarding materials, unprompted. She proposed a peer mentorship pilot program to her manager, who approved it in one meeting. 2 years later, that program became her title. Nothing about that trajectory was accidental. It was engineered step by step, from friction audit to flow map to the one sentence she kept on her desk. Alignment is not something you find buried inside yourself like treasure that was always there. Alignment is something you build, deliberately, through the specific sequence of measuring what depletes you, documenting what charges you, and declaring who you are in relation to that charge. And laziness, the very thing this whole book opened with, the thing you were told to overcome, laziness is the signal you were never taught to read. When work feels like dragging yourself through mud, you are not weak. You are misaligned. The mud is the data. So here is the question that carries you into what comes next. Now that you know who you are, what exactly are you going to do with that information tomorrow? Chapter 6. Small identities compound into unstoppable ones. Every day you do not act on who you say you want to be, that version of you gets farther away. Not dramatically, not with a warning. It simply drifts the way a boat drifts from a dock when no one is holding the rope. Here is what most people miss about that drift. It is not linear. Each day of distance makes the next day's return slightly more expensive, slightly harder to believe in. The cost is not just the day itself. It is the evidence that day would have created. Evidence that you are capable. Evidence that you are someone who follows through. That evidence, compounded over 30 days, over 60, over a quarter of a year, is not a small thing. It is the bedrock of a self-concept that nothing can shake. You are not losing time right now. You are losing the compounding proof of your own character. The mechanism causing that loss is not laziness, and it is not weakness. It is the absence of a principle that almost no one has been handed clearly. This chapter hands it to you. You ended the last chapter holding a question. Now that you know who you are, what are you going to do with that information tomorrow? That question was not rhetorical. It was structural. Knowing is not the same as being. And being is not the same as becoming. There is a gap between those three states, and that gap has a name. The name is repetition. Specifically, repetition that accumulates into something you start to recognize as yourself. Here is the open loop that will live in your mind for the next few minutes. There is a woman named Dara who, at the start of one particular January, could not finish a single week of any goal she set. Not one. By the end of March, she was the most consistent person in her office, in her household, and by her own report in her memory of herself. No dramatic intervention happened. No crisis forced her hand. What changed was a single idea she applied so simply it seemed almost insulting. You will hear exactly what that idea was, but not yet. First, you need to understand the architecture that made it work. Think about the last time you called yourself a certain kind of person. Maybe you said it out loud, maybe only inside your head. You said something like, I am not a morning person, or I am bad with money, or I never stick to things. Where did those statements come from? They came from evidence. Accumulated, uncontested evidence that you gathered from your own life and then accepted as a verdict. You did not decide to believe those things. They accumulated until they had enough weight to feel like facts. That is identity gravity, and it works in both directions. Every action you take is a piece of evidence deposited into one account or another. Skip the thing you said you would do, and you deposit a piece of evidence that says you are someone who skips things. Do the thing, even imperfectly, even briefly, even when it feels small, and you deposit a piece of evidence in the other account. One vote cast for a different version of you. Picture the person you were before these last 3 years unfolded, before hindsight edits it. Think about what you believed about yourself then. What you thought you were capable of. What you told yourself was simply not in your nature. How many of those things have already quietly shifted? Not because you forced them, but because life placed you in situations that made you act differently, and the acting changed what you believed. You did not notice the shift while it was happening. You only noticed it later, when you looked back and realized the person you used to be would not have handled this the way you just did. That is identity accumulation in action. The question this chapter answers is how to do that on purpose. Here is what the voting metaphor actually means practically, mechanically. Every completed action is a vote cast for an identity, not a transformation, not a revolution, a vote. One vote does not win an election, but votes do not expire. They stack. And when enough votes are cast in one direction, the outcome becomes almost predetermined. Not because the opposing votes disappear, but because they are simply outnumbered. This is why the discipline model fails you. The discipline model tells you to force compliance. It tells you that you are a broken machine, and the solution is more pressure, more willpower, more grit. But pressure does not change what you believe about yourself. Only evidence changes what you believe about yourself. And evidence comes from action. So the real question is never how do I force myself to do this? The real question is how do I cast enough votes, consistently enough, that the identity shifts on its own. Small votes count. A 2-minute version of the thing still votes. A partial attempt still votes. An imperfect, half-hearted, barely completed version of the behavior still deposits the evidence. This is the part that most people get wrong. It is worth sitting with. You have likely dismissed dozens of small actions because they felt too minor to matter. But in the identity economy, minor votes still count. They count precisely because they are real. You did not imagine them. They happened. And the part of your brain that tracks who you are logged them, quietly, without ceremony, and updated the tally. This is what 𝗓𝗓 discovered. She had spent 3 years starting things and stopping. Gym memberships, savings goals, reading habits, side projects. Every abandoned attempt left a small deposit in the wrong account. Every deposit made the next attempt feel heavier before it even began, because before she started she already had a record, and her record said she stopped. So she started trying to fix her willpower. That made everything worse. Now she was not only fighting the inertia of not doing the thing, she was also fighting the story that she lacked the character to do it. Then in early January, a colleague said something offhand at lunch. He said he had stopped trying to build habits and started trying to build votes. 𝗓𝗓 asked what he meant. He said he decided that every time he did even the smallest version of a behavior he wanted to own, he said one sentence to himself, just one sentence. He said, that is what I do. Not I am trying to do that. Not I want to be someone who does that, just that is what I do. 𝗓𝗓 thought it sounded absurd. She tried it anyway because she had nothing left to lose. The first week she made her bed 4 out of 7 days. Each time she said the sentence quietly. That is what I do. The second week, 5 days. Same sentence. The third week, she added a second behavior. She wrote 1 paragraph of the business proposal she had been postponing for 8 months. Some days the paragraph was 3 sentences. One day it was a single sentence. She said the sentence each time. That is what I do. By the end of February, something had shifted that she did not have words for at first. She described it later as a change in the direction of friction. Things that had required force now felt slightly strange to skip. Not impossible to skip, just slightly wrong, like wearing shoes on the wrong feet. Technically wearable, but noticeably off. That is identity gravity beginning to pull in the new direction. By mid-March, she had cast so many small votes in so many small moments that the identity had accumulated enough mass to move on its own. She was not being disciplined. She was being consistent with who she had proven herself to be. The consistency was no longer an act of will. It was an act of recognition. She recognized herself in the behavior, and people reliably act like themselves. Here is what the 30-day arc actually looks like from the inside. The first 10 days feel like performance. You are doing the thing, but it feels foreign. There is friction. The path of least resistance still runs in the old direction. Days 11 through 20 feel like negotiation. Some days the old identity pulls harder than the new votes. You skip a day. You feel the old verdict trying to reassert itself. This is normal. This is expected. Skipping one day does not erase the votes you have already cast. It only adds one vote to the other side. Keep voting. Days 21 through 30 feel like the lock beginning to turn, not turned, turning. The new identity does not feel fully natural yet, but it no longer feels foreign. It feels possible, and possible is all you need to keep going. Past 30 days, the math tips. Now here is what none of this means. It does not mean you vote for an identity that belongs to someone else. Borrowed identities do not accumulate the same way. If the behavior you are voting for is one you actually want, one that fits the grain of how you already move through the world, the votes compound fast. If the behavior is something you think you should want, something you are performing for an audience, the votes feel hollow even when they are cast. Hollow votes do not carry the same weight. This is where laziness becomes the diagnostic tool again. When you are consistently resistant to a behavior, when the path of least resistance runs hard away from it, that is not weakness. That is information. It may be the wrong identity, or it may be the right identity being approached from the wrong angle. Either way, the resistance is telling you something worth hearing. The question is not how to silence that resistance. The question is what it is pointing at. As this book keeps moving, we will get to a point about self-discipline that runs straight against the usual belief. When that point settles, it shifts not just how you think about effort, but how much of it you ever spend again. For now, carry this. Every completed action is a vote. Every vote is real. Enough real votes in one direction will eventually outvote even a decades-old self-image. You do not need to feel like the person you want to become. You only need to act like that person once today, in one small way, and then say to yourself what Dara said in her kitchen on a Tuesday morning with an unmade bed she was about to go make. That is what I do. So here is the question that carries you forward. If each small action you take is a vote cast for an identity, what identity has been quietly winning the election inside you, and is it the one you meant to elect? Chapter 7. Remove friction before adding motivation. The easiest thing you will ever do is the thing that requires nothing extra from you. That sounds obvious, almost insultingly so. But here is what that sentence actually means for your life. The actions you take most consistently are not the ones you care about most. They are the ones that cost the least to begin. If that is true, and it is, then the question of how to become consistent is not a question about motivation at all. It is a question about architecture. You have been told your whole life that the gap between who you are and who you want to be is a willpower gap. That if you just cared enough, tried harder, woke up earlier, wanted it more, the results would follow. But wanting is not the mechanism. Wanting is the weather. Some days it shows up clear and bright. Some days it does not come at all. And you cannot schedule a life around weather. This chapter is about something you can actually control. It is about the path your behavior naturally travels when nothing is forcing it anywhere, and how to bend that path toward the person you are trying to become. The previous chapter left you with a question about elections, about which identity has been quietly accumulating votes inside you. Now consider this. Most of those votes were not cast with intention. They were cast because the ballot was already on the table. That is the open door through which everything in this chapter walks. Think about Marcus. He was 31, working in logistics, and he had been trying to read more for 3 years running. He bought the books. He had a shelf full of them, spines uncracked, arranged by color because at some point he had started optimizing the aesthetics instead of opening the pages. Every Sunday night he told himself that this week would be different. Every Thursday he realized it was not. He was not lazy by any reasonable measure. He managed a warehouse team, coached his nephew's soccer practice, and kept his apartment cleaner than most people his age. But the book stayed closed. One evening Marcus moved a single book from the shelf to his kitchen counter next to the coffee maker. No system, no app, no 30-day challenge. He just moved the book. The next morning he read 4 pages while the coffee brewed. The morning after that, 6 pages. By the end of the month he had finished 2 books, and he had not summoned a single ounce of extra motivation to do it. He had simply removed the 12 steps between waking up and reading and replaced them with 1. The lesson did not come from his discipline. It came from his counter. Friction is not a metaphor. It is a measurable, real force operating on every behavior you try to build or break. Every extra step between you and an action is a small tax, and small taxes compound. Charge enough tax on any behavior and eventually nobody pays it, no matter how much they say they value it. You are not failing at consistency because you lack character. You are failing because your environment is quietly charging you too much to begin. Here is what most people do when they realize this. They add motivation. They listen to another podcast. They write another journal entry about their why. They tell another friend about their goal, which always feels productive in the moment and almost never is. None of that is wrong exactly, but it treats the symptom. Motivation is a temporary injection. It metabolizes. The environment you return to after the podcast ends will produce the same behavior it produced before you listened, unless you have changed something physical about that environment. Motivation solves a symptom. Friction removal solves the system, and the system always wins. Now here is where it gets specific. The 5 ways friction quietly taxes your behavior are not mysterious. They are embarrassingly practical. And once you see them, you will not be able to unsee them. The first one is distance, physical distance. The thing that is farther away gets done less and not by a small margin. Researchers studying snack consumption found that when candy was placed on a desk, people ate twice as much as when it was placed 6 feet away across the room. 6 feet. The choice did not change. The proximity did. You can use this in reverse. The behavior you want to do more of needs to be closer. If you want to exercise in the morning, put your shoes next to your bed the night before. Not in the closet, not in the corner next to the bed, where the first thing your feet find is the starting position. Distance is not trivial. Distance is a decision you make in advance without realizing it. The second one is visibility. Out of sight genuinely does mean out of mind. This is not a cliché. It is a description of how the brain allocates attention. You do not remember to do the things you cannot see. Your brain is not a calendar. It is a camera, and it responds to what is in the frame. Put the vitamins on the counter. Put the guitar on a stand in the living room instead of a case in the bedroom. Put the notebook open, not closed, on the desk where you sit every evening. Visibility is a form of permission. When something is in your line of sight, you have already done the first part of the decision. The third one is steps. Count the number of actions required to begin something you want to do regularly. Not the thing itself, just the beginning. If you have to find the app, log in, navigate to the right section, then choose a workout that is 4 steps before a single rep. Each step is a door that can close. Cut the number of steps. Log in and stay logged in. Lay out the single piece of equipment you need. Pre-fill the water bottle the night before. You are not being lazy when you do this. You are being precise. Every step you remove is a decision you made once in a moment of clarity, instead of a dozen times in a moment of fatigue. The fourth one is decision weight. Decision fatigue is real, and it hits hardest early in a habit before the behavior has become automatic. Every time you have to decide what to do, not how to do it, but what you are spending a resource that does not regenerate on demand. Pre-decide. If you are trying to write consistently, pre-decide the time and the minimum output. Not 10 pages, 1 paragraph. Not a masterpiece, a starting sentence, already written at the top of an open document. The decision is made. All you have to do is continue. The brain finds continuation far easier than initiation, and you can engineer initiation out of the equation entirely by doing the deciding in advance. The fifth one is environmental cues that pull you the wrong direction. This is the one people most resist because it requires them to admit that their environment has more power over them than they want to believe. Every time you sit on the couch and the remote is in arm's reach and the television is one button from on, you are not making a free choice. You are following a groove that the room has carved for you. This is not weakness. This is physics. The path of least resistance runs through what is easiest. And if what is easiest leads away from who you want to become, you do not fight the path. You redirect it. Move the remote. Unplug the router at 9 p.m. Put the thing that distracts you somewhere inconvenient. You are not punishing yourself. You are designing for the version of you that will exist in an hour, when energy is lower and the groove feels deeper. Now pause here for a moment. Travel back to life 3 years ago and look clearly, not in terms of what you had, but in terms of what your day looked like by default. What happened without you deciding it? Where did your time go when you were not paying attention? The answer to that question is not a reflection of who you are. It is a reflection of the environment you were inside. And if your environment has shifted, your defaults have shifted with it, which means you have more architectural control over your behavior than you have ever been told. This is not a small thing. This is the whole mechanism. Here is what friction removal does that motivation cannot. Motivation asks something of you every single day. It asks you to feel a certain way before you act. It makes action contingent on an internal state you cannot produce on command. Friction removal asks nothing of you in the moment. It requires one decision, made once in a moment of clarity, that then operates silently every day afterward. You do not have to believe in yourself every morning. You just have to encounter a counter with a book on it. There is a question this chapter opened without naming directly. It was the question underneath the question about Marcus, underneath the question about distance and steps and visibility. The real question is this. If the environment shapes behavior more than intention does, what does it mean that you have been blaming yourself for inconsistency all along? It means the blame was aimed at the wrong target, not to excuse you from responsibility, but to redirect that responsibility toward something useful. You are responsible for your environment. You are responsible for what is on the counter, what is in the drawer, what is visible from where you sit, and what you have already decided before fatigue arrives. That is a form of responsibility you can actually act on. That is the election you run in advance, before the votes are cast. Laziness, when it shows up and tells you it is too much effort to begin, is not a character flaw announcing itself. It is a diagnostic tool. It is the system showing you where the friction is. Listen to that signal. Do not fight it. Follow the laziness to its source and remove what it is pointing at. And then ask yourself this. If the path of least resistance led directly toward who you want to be, what would stop you from walking it every single day? In a later section, we will get to a point about identity, the idea that you have to earn it through time and repetition that runs straight against the usual belief. After that really registers, it shifts how you start your next morning. But first, consider the path your behavior naturally runs when nothing forces it. Is that path yours? Chapter 8. The moment the lazy label becomes impossible. Right now, something is slipping, not in a dramatic way you would notice on a Tuesday morning. Quietly, the way water moves through stone, not breaking it, just wearing it day after day, until one morning the shape is entirely different. Every day you carry a label that does not belong to you is a day that label compounds its cost. Not in motivation, not in effort, in identity. The person you are performing is subtly different from the person you are becoming. That gap costs you more than any missed paycheck or skipped workout. It costs you the clean internal story that makes action feel natural. Without that clean story, every single thing you want to do requires a little more force than it should, a little more argument with yourself, a little more convincing. That daily tax is invisible on any one day. Over years, it is the entire difference between a person who moves through their goals with ease and a person who wonders why nothing ever sticks. The question is not how to work harder. The question is what happens the moment the old label simply stops fitting. That question is what this chapter is built around. Hold it. The path your behavior naturally runs when nothing forces it. A question came forward in the last chapter, and it is still in the room. Is that path yours? It is a sharp question. Most people brush past it. But if you sat with it, if you let it land, you probably noticed one of two things. Either the path felt like yours and the discomfort came from admitting you had been ignoring it, or the path felt foreign, like watching someone else's habits from the outside, someone you were assigned to be instead of someone you chose. Both answers point to the same place. A label you have been living inside of that was never written by you. The lazy label is the most common one, and it is the most expensive. Here is what no one tells you about the word lazy. It is not a character trait. It is a conclusion someone reached about you, or that you reached about yourself, at a moment when the system around you was misaligned with the way you actually work. A child who cannot sit still in a classroom built for stillness is not broken. A person who cannot maintain habits designed for someone with a different schedule, different energy pattern, different internal reward structure, that person is not broken either. But if the conclusion of lazy gets stamped on them early enough and repeated enough times, it stops being a conclusion and starts being a cause. You do not just believe you are lazy. You begin to organize your behavior around the belief. You make peace with unfinished things. You develop a quiet internal story that explains the gap between what you intended and what happened. And that story always ends the same way. Of course, you are just lazy. That story has a weight, a gravity, and for years you have been orbiting it. Revisit the person you were before these last 3 years unfolded, before hindsight edits it. Not the circumstances, the internal voice. What did it say when you tried something and it did not hold? What was the first explanation that arrived? For most people who have carried the lazy label long enough, the answer was not the system is wrong, or the conditions are off, or this particular approach does not fit how I actually function. The answer was simpler. One short sentence, quiet as a reflex. Of course, this is what I do. I start things and I do not finish them. I try and I fade. This is me. Now here is what is true, and what this chapter exists to show you. There is a threshold, a specific, dateable, crossable line. On one side of that line, the old story is still available. It still functions as an explanation. You can still reach for it. On the other side, something has happened, one specific thing, and after it, the old story simply does not hold anymore. Not because someone convinced you, not because you read the right book or said the right affirmation, because you did a thing that the story said you would not do, and the story noticed. Before long, we will get to a point about motivation that runs straight against the usual belief. Once that becomes real to you, it shifts how you decide what to do next. But first, the threshold. Let me show you what it looks like in real life. Marcus was 31 years old when he started his third attempt at building a side income. Not a dramatic pivot, a small one. He spent 40 minutes on a Sunday afternoon setting up a freelance profile for the writing skills he used every day at his day job. He told himself, 1 month, 3 clients, see what happens. 2 weeks in, he had found 1 small client. The work was fine. Then the second week arrived and he simply did not open the laptop. A day passed. Then 3. Then the project deadline drifted by. He sent an apologetic message and the client moved on. Marcus closed the laptop and thought, there it is. Again. The same story with a different cover, but something was different this time. He had been reading about the friction his system had. He noticed that the reason he did not open the laptop was specific. His home desk was also where he played games, answered work emails, and scrolled at night. The laptop meant all of those things at once, work and rest and guilt and distraction, layered on top of each other in a single location. So he made one change. He moved the laptop to the kitchen table. Only freelance work happened at the kitchen table, nothing else. No games, no scrolling, just that. The next Sunday he sat down at the kitchen table, not because he felt motivated, because the kitchen table meant one thing, and he opened the document. That was the threshold, not the day he got the client, not the day he finished the first project. The day he sat down without the argument, that was the day the story changed. The lazy label requires a certain friction. It lives in the gap between what you said you would do and what you actually did. When you close that gap, not through willpower but through design, the story runs out of evidence. 14 months after moving that laptop, Marcus had replaced 30% of his salary with freelance income. Not because he became a different person. Because he designed one thing that made the old story structurally false. The threshold is not dramatic. That is the part people miss. You are waiting for a transformation that announces itself. A moment of clarity. A morning you wake up and feel different. But the threshold does not arrive as a feeling. It arrives as a fact. A small, specific, undeniable fact. You did the thing. It happened. And now the story that said you would not, cannot, do not, that story has a hole in it. Here is what identity gravity does with a hole like that. Every label you carry functions like a center of mass. Your behavior orbits it, even when you are fighting against it. The lazy label pulls your behavior back toward incompletion, not because you are weak, but because the label has mass accumulated over years of confirmed evidence. Every unfinished thing added weight to it. Every abandoned habit, every drifted deadline, every Sunday that passed without the thing you said you would do, all of it was fuel. The label got heavier. The orbit got tighter. Getting out of orbit felt impossible because you kept trying to escape with willpower. And willpower does not cancel gravity. What cancels gravity is a competing center of mass. The moment you have one clean, specific, undeniable piece of evidence that contradicts the label, you have placed a second gravitational body in the system. It is small at first. It cannot pull all your behavior at once, but it is real. And every subsequent piece of confirming evidence, every time you sit at the kitchen table, every time you do the thing without the argument, that second body gains mass. Slowly at first, then not slowly at all. There is a tipping point somewhere in that process. You will not feel it as a tipping point when it happens. You will only notice it in retrospect, when you reach for the old story and find it is not there. You look for the explanation, of course, I am just lazy, and it does not arrive. Because the evidence no longer supports it. The story has been starved. What you are building toward in this book, what the whole system of friction removal and identity alignment has been pointing at, is not just better habits. It is this: the moment the lazy label becomes an impossible conclusion. Now consider your own threshold behavior, not a goal, not a habit, one specific, small, designed action that would produce a piece of evidence the old story cannot absorb, not something impressive, something dateable, something you could put on a calendar with a single sentence. On this day I did this, and the story had to accommodate a new fact. What is that action for you? The discipline as willpower model will tell you to push harder until the label breaks, but you have tried that. You know how it ends. That model treats you as a machine that needs more force applied. The truth is different. You are a system that needs one misaligned element corrected, one friction point removed, one location, one time, one single constraint adjusted so that the path of least resistance runs toward the action rather than away from it. When it does, you will not feel yourself changing. You will just find that the argument does not happen the way it used to. The pull toward the old orbit weakens, not because you conquered it. Because the new orbit has weight now. Real, earned, evidence-built weight. The lazy label was never a description of your nature. It was a description of a mismatch. And mismatches can be corrected with precision, not with effort, with design. The question is not whether you can change. The question is, what is the one thing you would have to do for the old story to run out of evidence? Chapter 9. Laziness was always your compass, not curse. Every civilization that has ever risen and fallen knew this pattern. In every era, across every landscape where human beings gathered and built and dreamed, there were people who could not be pushed into the wrong work. They were called lazy. They were called difficult. They were called wasted potential wrapped in excuses. But a quiet few of those people, the ones who survived the accusations long enough, eventually found the thing that did not feel like effort, and they became extraordinary at it. This pattern is older than any word we have for it, and it is happening to you right now. The question your last chapter left hanging in the air was this: what is the one thing you would have to do for the old story to run out of evidence? This chapter is the answer, and the answer is going to require you to look back at your laziness differently than you ever have before. You have been carrying it like a wound. That word, that label, lazy. Maybe someone put it on you early, a teacher, a parent, a boss who watched you coast through things that bored you and decided the problem was you. Maybe you put it on yourself. Maybe you looked at your inconsistency, at your abandoned habits and half-finished notebooks and apps you paid for and never opened, and you decided it meant something damning about your character. It did not. Here is what it actually meant. Your body and your mind, working together with a precision you were never given credit for, were refusing to spend energy on things that did not fit who you actually are. That refusal had a cost. You know the cost. The guilt, the shame, the creeping suspicion that everyone else had some internal engine you were born without. But underneath the cost was something extraordinarily honest. Laziness, in the way you experienced it, was never randomness. Think about this carefully. You were not lazy about everything. Nobody is. You could stay up until 3 in the morning doing the thing that pulled at you. You could read for 4 hours without noticing the time pass when the subject was one that belonged to you. You could organize or create or move or build or connect or analyze when the target was right. The laziness was specific. It had a shape, and shapes are information. Consider a woman named Dara. She spent 11 years in marketing, competent, occasionally praised, chronically exhausted. Not from the hours, she had done longer hours in college without complaint. Exhausted from the friction. Every morning felt like walking into a current she had to swim against. She tried every productivity method she could find. She set alarms and wrote affirmations and built elaborate systems to force herself into motion. Nothing held for more than 3 weeks. She called it laziness. Her manager called it laziness. She believed it. Then her company went through a restructuring, and she was temporarily moved to training new employees. She did not prepare for it. She did not force herself into it. She just walked in and started talking. 2 hours disappeared. The new employees looked at her the way people look at someone who is speaking their own unspoken thoughts back to them. Her manager noticed. Her numbers in training outperformed everything she had ever produced in her primary role. But here is what matters most about Dara's story. She was not suddenly disciplined. She was not suddenly motivated. She was aligned. The effort vanished because the friction vanished. And what she had called laziness for 11 years had been accurately and persistently telling her that marketing was the wrong direction. Do not rush past that. Call up the person you were before these last 3 years unfolded, before hindsight edits it. The things you kept abandoning. Not all of them, just the ones that felt like obligation, like performance, like the version of success someone else had designed and handed to you. Think about how hard you worked to feel nothing while doing them. That effort, the effort of suppressing your own signal, was enormous. You spent real energy fighting your own compass, and you called the compass broken. This is the open loop the book has been carrying since its first pages. Laziness was introduced as your problem, the thing to overcome. The enemy standing between you and consistency. Every chapter has been dismantling one layer of the discipline as willpower model. The idea that you are a broken machine requiring forced compliance, that the right combination of rules and punishments and morning routines will finally make you produce. But now you are standing at the last reversal. Laziness was not your problem. Misalignment was, and laziness was the only truthful thing in the room. The path of least resistance is not a character flaw. It is a map. Water does not flow downhill because it is weak. It flows downhill because downhill is where it can go without losing itself. You are always trying to flow uphill. Into careers, habits, goals, and identities that required you to betray your actual direction just to take one more step. And when you stopped, when you quit, when you scrolled instead of worked and slept instead of planned, your body was not failing you. It was protecting you from spending another decade in the wrong direction. This is the revelation that changes how you move going forward. Not that laziness is good, not as a blank permission to avoid discomfort. Discomfort that comes from growth in the right direction feels entirely different from discomfort that comes from sustained misalignment. You know the difference already. You have felt both. Growth discomfort is sharp and temporary and leaves something behind. Misalignment discomfort is dull and constant and leaves only erosion. The laziest version of you was the most honest. It refused to sustain effort that betrayed your true nature. Every time you quit, every time you stalled, every time you could not make yourself begin, that was your nature drawing a line. You mistook the line for a limit. It was not a limit. It was a direction. Identity gravity, which this book has returned to again and again, pulls you towards certain things and away from others. That pull is not weakness. It is the architecture of who you actually are. Engineering your consistency means building with that pull, not against it. It means treating your old laziness as the most accurate diagnostic tool you have ever owned. Wherever you felt the deepest, most immovable resistance, that is where the misalignment was loudest. Wherever effort disappeared without your noticing, that is where your system wants to go. You do not have to apologize for the years you spent refusing the wrong work. The refusing was wisdom. Slow, costly, misunderstood wisdom, but wisdom all the same. What remains now is to stop needing the refusal to be loud. You have heard it. You have decoded it. The compass has been pointing somewhere this whole time. And you have been staring at it, wondering why you cannot walk north when it is pulling you south. The work of the final chapter is not more reframing. It is arrival, which means the only question left worth asking is this. Now that you know where you are actually built to go, what happens when you stop pretending otherwise? Chapter 10. You are now someone who cannot stop. You have made it here, and something about that fact deserves a moment of honest attention, not celebration. Honest attention. Most people who start a book like this do not finish it, not because they run out of time, not because life gets too complicated. They stop because somewhere around the middle, the book begins asking something real of them. And the easiest way to avoid answering is to simply close the app and move on. You did not do that. So the question is not whether you have changed. The question is whether you have noticed yet. There is a version of you reading this right now who still thinks the work ahead is about doing more. More consistency, more output, more proving. That version of you is still operating on the old model, the one this whole book has been quietly dismantling. The discomfort you might be feeling right now is not a warning. It is a signal that the old frame is losing its grip. Stay with that. The previous chapter ended with a question. What happens when you stop pretending otherwise? That question was not rhetorical. It was a door. And this chapter is what is on the other side. Here is what nobody tells you about the moment identity actually shifts. It does not feel like a breakthrough. It does not arrive with clarity or sudden confidence. It feels at first like a strange quietness, like the argument you have been having with yourself for years just stopped mid-sentence. No resolution, no conclusion, just one day, no argument. Bring to mind the person you were before these last 3 years unfolded, before hindsight edits it. Not the imagined version, the exact one that was real at the time. What was the story you were telling yourself about why things had not moved yet? What was the reason that week, that month, that year? And how much energy did it take to carry that story around, to maintain it, to defend it to yourself every time evidence suggested it was not quite true? That is the weight you have been putting down. Consistency was never your problem. You have been consistent your entire life, consistently deferring, consistently orbiting the thing you actually wanted without landing on it, consistently finding friction in the exact places your effort needed to flow. That is a form of consistency too. One kind builds something over time. The other kind just maintains a very convincing version of standing still. Here is where the laziness principle completes itself. Remember how this book began, with laziness framed as the obstacle, the thing to overcome, the soft enemy of discipline. But laziness was never the enemy. Laziness is a diagnostic tool. When something feels like pulling teeth, when you have to summon willpower just to begin, when the resistance is so constant that rest starts to look like rescue, that is not a character flaw. That is misalignment announcing itself. And the opposite is also true. When the work starts to feel like water finding its level, when forward motion stops requiring a pep talk, When you look up and realize you have already done the thing without bracing for it first, that is alignment. That is your actual nature running at its natural speed. Laziness told you where the friction was. Now that you have followed it to its source, what remains is flow. There is a man named Conrad who spent 11 years as a mid-level account manager at a logistics company. He was not bad at it. He was reliable, thorough, never complained. But every Sunday evening, something in him went quiet and heavy. He had learned to call that feeling adulthood. He thought responsible people just felt this way. He thought the weight was normal. One Tuesday, he started keeping a notebook. Not a journal, just a record of which parts of his day made time go fast and which parts made it go slow. He did this for 60 days. At the end of 60 days, he had something that looked less like a journal and more like a map. The slow parts were almost entirely tasks someone else had told him he should be good at. The fast parts were almost entirely things no one had asked him to do, but he did anyway. Conrad did not quit his job the next day, but he started making small decisions aligned with the fast column. A year later, his job title had not changed. His income had. His Sundays had. His face, his wife told him, had. Conrad did not fix his discipline. Conrad found his direction. The consistency followed without being asked. This is the revelation the whole book has been building toward. Consistency is not a goal you pursue through force of will. It is not a habit you install through clever systems alone. It is the natural output of a person operating inside an identity that fits them. When the work is an expression of who you are, stopping requires more effort than continuing. That is not motivation. That is gravity, identity gravity. You have felt it pulling in the wrong direction before. You know what it is like when your environment, your self-image, your daily language about yourself all lean toward a version of you that is small and stuck. That gravity is just as powerful when it leans forward. When your identity says this is simply what I do, when consistency is not a decision you make each morning but a fact you operate from, the question of whether to continue never really comes up. You do not decide to breathe. You are a person who breathes. Now look away from the screen for a moment and picture this. 1 year from now, not a fantasy version, a grounded one. You are sitting somewhere ordinary. A kitchen, a desk, a parked car. You are in the middle of something. Not the beginning of something, not bracing to start. You are already inside the work, already past the part where starting felt like lifting a boulder because that part stopped happening a long time ago. You are not counting the days. You are not tracking the streak. You are not trying to feel motivated enough. You are just doing what you do, the way you always do it now. And it strikes you briefly that you cannot actually remember the last time you had to talk yourself into it. That is not a fantasy. That is what alignment produces over 12 months of low-friction motion. And here is the thing about that person sitting in that ordinary place 1 year from now. They do not look like someone who won a battle. They look like someone who stopped fighting one. The discipline as willpower model told you that consistency required daily combat with your weaker self. That every morning was a small war. That the prize went to whoever could white-knuckle it longest. That model was not just exhausting. It was wrong. It was treating you like a broken machine that needed forcing, rather than a working system that needed aligning. You were never broken. You were misaligned, and now something has moved. The work ahead of you is not harder than the work behind you. In many ways, it is lighter. You are no longer carrying the resistance of moving against your own nature. The friction has dropped. The path runs in the direction you were built to go. The laziness that once felt like a verdict about your character turns out to have been pointing at something real all along. The places where the fit was wrong, the places where the energy leaked, the places where someone else's definition of success had been quietly installed where your own should have lived. You followed that signal all the way here. Which means there is only one question left. Not about consistency, you have that now, or it is already assembling itself beneath the surface of your daily life. The question is about the next layer. Identity does not stop at one revision. You have found who you are when you stop fighting yourself. The question the next chapter of your life will ask, not this book, but your actual life, is who you become when you start building from that person outward. Consistency is no longer something you practice. It is what you are.